Brought to you by ExpressCare Health and Skin Center. Get in, get out, get better.
Welcome back to Healthy Living. Tonight's topic is insulin. What is it and who needs it? Joining me is ExpressCare's Dr. Jitka Lom.
Hi, Isa.
So, Doc, what is insulin?
Well, insulin is a very powerful hormone that is produced by our pancreas. And what it does is it regulates the blood sugar in our body. You know, when we eat, any food that we eat gets converted into glucose in our bloodstream. Anything that you eat turns into glucose. And then that glucose, if it accumulates in your blood, becomes very toxic and poisonous to your body. That's why when your sugar's out of control, you're sick. So in order to bring that blood glucose down, our pancreas will pump out some insulin. And what the insulin does is it pushes the glucose out of our bloodstream into the muscle and into the fat. That's what it does, so that our blood sugar will drop and we'll store the glucose for later use. We'll use it in our muscles and we'll store it in our fat.
Okay, so who needs insulin?
Well, everyone needs insulin to survive. If you do an experiment like they actually used to way long ago on dogs and so on, take out their pancreas, the dog dies. And humans will die if they do not have any insulin. So everybody needs it. Who needs supplemental insulin, meaning who needs insulin shots, are people who don't produce enough of their own, typically the type 1 diabetic or somebody who's had surgery where their pancreas has been injured for a while, or, for example, someone who's a type 2 diabetic and they've maxed out their medication.
Okay, Jackie from Inarahan is asking, what can you eat while taking insulin?
Well, when you're taking insulin, you should stick to a regular healthy diet, which is balanced. So depending again on the type of diabetes that you have and the type of insulin that you're using, you would want to stick with a balanced diet of some grains, some protein, but staying away from sugar. I think the message is stay away from sugar.
Okay, so Eric from Tamuning is asking, what are the 4 types of insulin?
Right, so insulin that's produced by your body is released from the pancreas in 2 kinds of ways. We always have a little bit of baseline insulin that's being produced by our pancreas all the time, like a little low-level bit that's being put out all the time. Then whenever we eat, our pancreas springs into action and pumps out a whole bunch of insulin to handle the food that we just took in. So scientists have discovered ways that we have to produce insulin that kind of mimic that. So we have a very long-acting insulin, something like Lantus, which is just 1 shot, lasts for 24 hours, gives you a nice baseline sugar control. Then we have very rapid acting. That one works within 15 minutes. Then we have one that's intermediate acting. That one kicks in about 2 or 3 hours, and then we have the regular one, which usually kicks in after about 1.5 hours to 2 hours. So depending on how we call it brittle, how brittle your diabetes is, how easy it is to control, you may be on 1 or 2 different kinds of insulin, meaning one that's long-acting, sort of keeping you very stable all the time, and then when you eat, you might need to take an additional dose of the shorter acting, or sometimes they use the intermediate one to kind of guide you through the rest of the day, if that works for you.
Okay, so our viewer Amanda from Mangilau is asking, how do you administer insulin?
Well, everybody knows about insulin shots. They come in, draw it up with a syringe from a bottle, shoot it in, or there are pre-made pens now, insulin pens that are much easier to use, just dial up and shoot. And there's a new one that's just come out in 2015, which is an inhaled insulin. It's called Afrezza. And that one, I have not seen anyone yet on Guam with it, but it's available, quite effective. It is one of the shorter acting insulins, so it's not one that you would be able to use exclusively. Usually for most people it'd be something they'd use in combination with a longer acting insulin drug.
Wow, that's really useful for people with children or children with diabetes, because when I was growing up, I actually had some friends who had type 1 and, they would run away from their parents who were trying to give them shots all the time. So.
Right. And diabetes in young people is extremely challenging. It's also challenging in people who are disabled or, can't manipulate it, can't check their sugar. This is very difficult. So hopefully someday soon we'll have monitoring blood glucose monitoring that doesn't involve sticking yourself with a needle. But there's another device called an insulin pump. Not everybody knows about that you basically wear all the time, and it will regulate and give you a little dose of insulin as needed. You can also make it give you a little bit more as needed. They're quite costly. Insurance often doesn't cover them, but just as an option, it's something that is out there. It controls the sugar much better than other methods.
Okay, so for those who do use insulin, when should they use it?
Well, again, typically somebody who's on type 1 diabetic will use insulin, long-acting insulin. They'll shoot that up in the morning, something like Lantus, and then they may use either NPH or a combination, the 70-30 type of insulin, where it's 70% longer acting and 30% shorter acting insulin, and they'll do that in a twice-a-day shot. But we always want to give it right before we eat.
Okay, so our viewer Kayla from Totu is asking, what is insulin resistance?
Yeah, insulin resistance is a very common condition here on Guam, and it goes along with obesity or something called metabolic syndrome, where the person's body doesn't respond as well as it should to insulin. Insulin is a hormone. It's made by the pancreas and it travels around the bloodstream, but it has to plug into a receptor in order to send the message to the cell to do its thing. So the insulin by itself floating around doesn't help us if our receptors are not listening. And in people with insulin resistance, that receptor is not listening. So they have to use larger and larger doses of insulin to get the same effect. The solution to insulin resistance is weight loss. It's very difficult to achieve that because of their whole metabolic picture, but it is possible, and that's where their focus needs to be. Medicine can help them, but lifestyle measures are primary.
All right, thanks so much, Doc. Stay
You're
tuned.
welcome.
We'll answer more of your questions after the break.